It's been quite pitiful to watch and listen to and read about Dali Mpofu's attempts to explain away the money which made its way from the VBS to, at the very least, senior people within the economic freedom fighters. Yes, we met. Yes, they gave us money. It took him a while to come to that acknowledgement. But hey, there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, they asked to meet with us because they were upset about our taking them on for the home loan that they had offered to Jacob Zuma. And yes, after that meeting, they did give us some cash, but there's no link between the two. It's simply that, we understood their position, they understood our position, they love us, so they wanted to give us some money. Why didn't it go into an EFF account? Well, that's not really relevant, because whatever account it went into doesn't make the donation illegal in any way. What has been absent from Advocate Mpofu's explanations has been any offer to tender evidence that the money was spent on EFF activities rather than on Le Coq Sportif and other clothing for EFF leaders. There's been no offer to tender such evidence. Daily Maverick today, train spotter Richard Poplak, the end of Julius Malema and Floyd Shivambu. They could have been contenders, now they are just crooks. And the opening paragraph of that story, the economic freedom fighters Julius Malema and Floyd Shivambu are going to jail. Not tomorrow, no, but certainly in your lifetime, should you take your medication on schedule. Hello, Richard.
Hey, John, how are you?
I'm not entirely convinced that Mr. Malema and Mr. Shivambu are going to jail.
And let me be quite emphatic. I'm not convinced either. It's not really my job to be convinced even by my own rhetoric. But I will say this: when you look at the facts as they stand, when you look at this most recent affidavit, which is doing the rounds, when you look at all of the stuff that's been unearthed, especially by Paulie van Dijk in Daily Maverick, but also on other news sites, when you look at the preponderance of evidence against these gentlemen, you have to reason that the National Prosecuting Authority will have to act. Now, we understand the NPA as a political organization that is tied to the SAPS and in turn tied to the presidency. But at this point, it is going to be very, very difficult for President Ramaphosa to withstand calls for something to be done about the VBS saga. You have very clear lines, John, of a bank which was meant to house the savings of poorer rural South Africans and poorer municipalities, which, by the way, wasn't legal in itself. And that bank was robbed down to the last penny. The assumption being that you and I, the taxpayers, would end up bailing out the bank and everybody would be made whole and it would be a victimless crime. But that has not happened at all. It's been a crime with many victims, and it is now time for action to be taken.
Well, it's been time for action to be taken for a while. I mean, you talked about Paulie van Dijk's investigations and what they revealed. Those are half a decade at least ago. Maybe we needed the Matotsi witness statement in order to prod, and maybe in addition to the witness statement, he has offered other evidence which will allow the NPA a greater chance of a successful prosecution. But perhaps the level of interest in the story is up to each individual reader. But what I found intriguing was reading also about the decline, well, not really the decline of the EFF, because it's been quite an intriguing thing to chart and try and understand. And you say it's always been the sort of child scream of the ANC Youth League, when it was the ANC Youth League, and when it's now the ANC Youth League wanting to be the ANC Youth League again. And we don't really have a party of the left in the country anymore, if we ever did, if the EFF was ever a party of the left.
Well, I mean, this is the tragedy. I mean, aside from all the victims of the VBS bank robbery, what you're looking at is the decline of any real progressivism in this country. When you think of how the trade unions through COSATU were co-opted within the ANC, the SACP and other institutions were long ago co-opted. When you look at how the EFF behaved when they had political momentum behind them, when CEOs, I was one of the few journalists who were covering them right from the beginning, and the CEOs of big companies would come and say, I actually agree with what Julius, Malema, and Floyd Shivambu are saying. I just don't quite like the tone that they use. And it was like, something has to change in this country because there are a lot of starving people, and they're quite angry about it. So, there was this point in the EFF's trajectory where one felt that were they being honest and were they willing to do the hard yards of coalition building, not just through the SACP and COSATU, but through civil society and other organizations. Section 27 comes to mind. Dozens of other organizations with whom they could have allied to create a progressive leftist front. They did none of that work. They were completely unwilling to coalition build, you could tell, quite early. But, they played a vital role in our politics during the state capture years. Say whatever you want, but that is the truth. They rattled Parliament out of its comfort, and they proved a powerful voice against state capture, for however long that lasted and however much good it did.
If one looks at Parliament now, and we are going to have to wait to see how the Government of National Unity works, and when it reduces the number of poor people and therefore reduces the level of volcanic anger underneath the surface, which is occasionally erupting. Where are the forces in the current National Assembly that... everybody says that they are for the poor. Everybody says that every policy that they construct, every policy that they advocate is for the poor. But where do you see in the current National Assembly the most listenable voice for the poor coming from?
Quite frankly, I don't see it anywhere. I mean, what we've talked about is this being one of the more pro-business cabinets we've ever had, one of the more pro-business administrations we've ever had. We never really talk about a pro-people cabinet or pro-people government. What was so exciting about the EFF at its inception, and what is so tragic about its demise, is that really what it's done is wiped away any of the meaningful rhetoric that redounded to the left with regard to saying, we actually need to change the system. It can't all be in service of private business or 7 or 8 deployees from the ANC. We need something more sophisticated. We need something wider. We need something more aggressive. As we know, the Treasury recently cut off all discussions about a basic income grant at this stage. So what we have, effectively, John, is a status quo administration that really moves towards the ANC's center, which is the National Development Plan that they produced about a little over a decade ago now, which is middle of the road centrism that is certainly not pro-poor. And while it may mean growth for a few, I can't see it meaning meaningful growth across the board.
Because the argument from business and the centre and business-friendly centre is that if business is not making money, there's no money to make the poor less poor. And that if you don't have business on side, then you are never going to construct an economic system which is going to be less unjust than the system that the ANC inherited, and that the ANC was making some progress in moderating, but which over the last 15 years, that project seems to have fallen by the wayside.
Sure, but I mean, if you look at apartheid, could you have imagined a more pro-business environment, especially for the mining houses and for others? Yes, there were exchange controls. Yes, the National Party weren't the nicest people on the planet by a long shot. But the truth of the matter is that a lot of people got very, very, very rich, while 90% of the country remained completely poor. We moved into a situation that liberalized, but that in effect kept many of the structures of the National Party government in place. And we're in an economic scenario that doesn't look that different from how apartheid did. Yeah, sure, there's a slightly different middle class, there's some new players, but for the most part, when we look at how things have been restructured, they haven't really been restructured. So my argument would be, sure, well, of course, business needs to function in order to create jobs. It isn't business's job, if I may, to create jobs. They're there to create wealth for their shareholders, right? We need a system in which we consider far more broadly how to involve millions of people in our economy. And I can't see that happening with this current government of national unity.
Richard Poplak of the Daily Maverick and, of course, other outlets, thank you very much for talking to us this afternoon.